So our speaker is Andy Haben. He is the project director for SquareOne Villages, which are several self-managed communities of minimal shelter, as you know. He is the author of Tent City Urbanism. It's a book that grew out of his thesis research on tent cities. And he's going to grab a drink from hurrying over here. So I think this is, as I've already said, this is a great time for him to be speaking to us. Oh, you're going to lose a few minutes, but I think
okay.
I'll hold your water. So thank you.
All right, well, thank you. I apologize, I had a meeting run late, and took a little longer to get over here. Do you guys have a clicker, or should I just, do you think it might work from there. Might work from there. So I was invited to, excellent. Sorry, does it go back? Can you start me back over? Sorry. It goes forward, but not backwards. So I was invited to talk about some of the work that we've been doing with SquareOne Villages. It's a nonprofit here in Eugene, Oregon. Yeah, that's good. And so we focus, our mission is basically building self-managed communities of cost-effective tiny houses. Our first project opened in 2013, Opportunity Village, and we're about to break ground on Emerald Village, which is going to start next week, which is the reason I'm out of breath. We've been doing lots of meetings in order to get that to the point where we can actually break ground. But I thought I would start to talk about the 6 kind of core components of how our projects work. So the first is tiny houses. So we're looking at homes of 400 square feet or less. So building cost-effective place shelters and homes. And then connecting that with common buildings. So there's common kitchens, gathering areas and bathrooms. And I'll get to that later. It's kind of different in some of our different projects, but sort of the idea is small personal space and then connecting that with larger common spaces to be cost effective in the use of our resources and also create communities where people come together, and there's social benefits to that. Resident management, so in our projects, the residents are involved in the decision making. Village meetings, so those decisions happen at a village meeting where residents come together to talk about issues of common interest. And then community agreements, there's a basic listing of sort of the rules and guidelines of what it means to live in one of our communities. And then oversight by a nonprofit sponsor, which is SquareOne Villages. And so how did I get into all this? I did a thesis project back at the University of Cincinnati on self-organized homeless camps. It was shortly after the recession and the housing bubble back in 2009, and I began reading stories of homeless camps popping up throughout the country, and I decided to look a little bit more into it. There wasn't a whole lot of information in the newspaper articles I was reading, so I spent a summer visiting some of these encampments. And I wrote a book on the thesis turned into a book called Tent City Urbanism, and it outlines 3 models for basically bridging the gap between the street and conventional housing options. And we actually, once Emerald Village gets built, we'll have all 3 of these models implemented here in Eugene. So the first is the sanctuary camp. So the idea of giving people a legal place to exist rather than moving a camp around from one space to another. And we've seen the city of Eugene in the past few years come to accept that with the rest stop ordinance. I think we have probably 5 rest stops now throughout the city. Many currently in the Trainsong neighborhood or in the Whitaker neighborhood. You all may be aware that the city council is currently talking about the idea of putting a rest stop in each of the districts throughout Eugene to kind of so it's not all consolidated in one neighborhood, and that each neighborhood might have one of these places. Community supported shelters is another nonprofit that we kind of started together in the beginning, and they're the ones that they focus on building the Conestoga huts that are in a lot of the church parking lots, and they also do some of these rest stops. The middle example is the transitional village, which is our opportunity village, which I'll go into detail on here coming up. And then the third one is a permanent village, so Emerald Village, so permanent tiny houses. And so I'm just going to give you guys a quick overview of sort of our organization. It all started back in the fall of 2011 with Occupy Eugene. Some of you might remember that. There was basically a protest camp that was moving around throughout the city, and what started as a place of protest quickly became a place of refuge for those that had nowhere else to go. And so when they finally evicted the camp for the last time at the end of 2011, I believe it was right before Christmas, they estimated over 200 people were displaced with no place else to go. And so Mayor Kitty Piercy created a task force on homeless solutions to find new and innovative ways for dealing with this issue. I think the public kind of was expressing that they were tired of just moving the issue from place to place to place. It costs a lot of money to do that, and it doesn't really achieve any sort of productive benefits. And so task force looked at how can we come up with better solutions. And the number one recommendation was to create a safe and secure place to be with oversight provided by a nonprofit organization. And so we began meeting at the Calc office, basically just a group of advocates to talk about what should this place to be look like and how should it be organized. And that ultimately led to Opportunity Village. Here you see the recommendation by the task force that I just mentioned. And it didn't happen very quickly. The recommendation was there. It was the number one recommendation. But as you all know, a lot of times recommendations are made and then they sit on a shelf. And so we tried to become the driving force that held the city to that recommendation. And the picture here is just outside of a city council meeting where they're about to talk about homelessness for the 100th time probably. And we set up two things. These are actually right across the street from each other. So one was the Conestoga hut, which was a shelter that we built. We thought a very cost-effective improvement to a tent. You're off the ground, you have some degree of insulation, and you have a lockable door. And across the street was the Sleeps Camp, protest camp. So we sort of juxtaposed a very visible problem with a potential solution that was going unused because it was currently not legal for people to stay in those structures. And then at that meeting in 2013, two pretty big things that came out of that I think has shaped the way the city has been addressing homelessness in the past couple years. The first was that they approved the Conestoga hut as part of the overnight sleeping program. So most of these are administered by St. Vincent de Paul. You can now have, back then it was 3, they've since expanded to 6. You can have 6 RVs or tents on non-residential lots. And the city council moved to also approve these Conestoga huts. So Community Supported Shelters has been, I think they probably built 40 or 50 of these now that are placed throughout the city of Eugene, providing very basic intermediate solutions. And then the other piece that came out of that meeting was that the city council approved a site for Opportunity Village. So we had been pushing for several months, and they basically narrowed it down to 6, and then they eventually narrowed it down to the site at 111 North Garfield. It's an acre of land that was formerly used for storing city vehicles, public works vehicles. It's actually a 2-acre site, and they basically fenced the first acre and then consolidated all their stuff to the back acre, and we have this front acre here. So this is sort of a before picture. We worked on a design. We wanted to do small micro-housing structures supported by common open spaces. So we have 30 tiny houses between 60 and 80 square feet, a few of the Conestoga huts, but then also some wood frame structures that you'll see here in a minute. And we built it all with volunteer labor. So the whole project for 30 units of temporary transitional micro-housing we were able to do just under $100,000 in cash donations, and then we estimated another $115,000 in-kind labor and material donations. So this was the first day we got on site. We built 5 houses. We had about 100 people out there. Dug our own utilities. We ran water to the site, ran electric to the site. And this slide kind of shows you the structures that we built out there. So they're ultra simple. We basically call them detached bedrooms. It's a place to lock up and store your stuff. And we built them in a panelized kit. So we would spend a month building as many house panels as we could in our shop. And then on the last Saturday of the month, we'd have an open volunteer event where we'd have as many people that we could get come out to the site, and we put them together. And so a lot of the skilled labor was done in our shop ahead of time. And so we had some, volunteers that would help us build those that were a little bit more skilled. And then we would get to the site, and they're very easy to put together. And so it was a way to involve a lot of the community directly in a home building process. And so here's a shot of a few of them coming up. And there's a completed pod. So this has been open since August of 2013. And as I was mentioning in the beginning, so Opportunity Village is a very ultra low cost temporary solution. So the houses are permitted as temporary structures. They were inspected for structural inequality, but we were allowed to get around some requirements in terms of permanent foundations and permanent utility hookups to each structure. And instead, we focused the utility infrastructure on our common facilities. So we have a common bathroom. There's 2 restrooms, a shower room, and a laundry room. Up top there is our kitchen with a pantry. We have a relationship with Food for Lane County where our residents can go and shop to get community food for the whole village each week. And then we have a 30-foot yurt from Pacific Yurts that sort of serves as the central living room. We have a heated pellet stove. We have computers, and that's where the weekly meeting is that all residents attend. And I guess I didn't preface all this by saying that this was just approved as a 1-year pilot project. So that's why a lot of the infrastructure is very temporary. Everything's designed to be picked up and moved to another location if we had to. But we've since that initial, basically it was approved as a 1-year pilot project by a 7-2 council vote, and it's since been revisited twice, and we've had unanimous support to extend the lease. So our current lease goes through June of 2018. So we're basically operating on city-owned land for a nominal fee at $1 a year. They haven't actually collected that dollar, I don't think, but it was more of a formality. And basically on short-term leases. I think the long-term plan for that site is to build a public works storage facility. But I believe they don't necessarily have the funds in the budget, so we've continued to receive extensions at this site. Here's just a few numbers. So we've been there for about 3 years. We have around 35 people that stay there at a time. It's for single and adult couples, so you have to be 18 or up because it's permitted as a homeless shelter, which was a requirement the city had for us. And so it's actually, I think, the only place in town that will allow homeless folks to stay together. Like at the Mission, you have to separate, and so this is a pretty important thing. We have a lot of couples that have been living out in the woods for several years because they don't want to come in and live separated because they're married, and here they can actually live together. So we think that that's a unique thing that we can offer, and we also allow people to keep their pets. I guess I skipped some stuff on here. So that's $100,000. So if you amortize those capital costs over 5 years and account for our operating costs, it's a project that comes out to about $5 per person per night. So we think this is actually probably one of the most cost-effective shelter models out there. 5 basic rules, which you can read up there. So those are basically, there's a community agreement, which you can read on our website. It's basically a one-sider that kind of lists the basic requirements of folks that are living there that everybody has to agree to. So what you give and what you get, you basically, residents pay a $30 a month utility fee to help cover operating costs. And then we also offset that with ongoing donations. 8 hours of front desk, so it's a self-managed community. There's always somebody at the front desk to answer phone calls, give tours, answer questions, things like that. And then 2 hours of community improvements, so landscaping, administrative work, things like that. We make sure to find something that anybody can participate in. Cleaning the community bathroom once a month. So the bathroom, well, it's a small bathroom that everybody shares. It gets cleaned every day. And the residents came up with an idea, how do you share one shower with 30 people? They came up with a sign-up sheet with half-hour blocks so that you can sign up for your showers ahead of time. And it's actually worked pretty well so that everybody can get a shower when they need one. And then the other requirement is the attendance at the weekly meeting. So that's when people get together and there's committees, so you get committee updates. You can vote on policy changes, things like that. And so people are actually active participants in how their community is operated and managed, which I think results in a strong sense of ownership. Even if it's not financial ownership, there's a sense of social ownership. And so because people have a say in how their community works, they have an interest in making it work, and so there's pride in their community, and I think that's why it's been so successful. In return, you get a small, safe, and private space to call your own, access to the various common facilities that I mentioned, computer and Wi-Fi access, and we also give each resident a bus pass so they can get around. We've had very positive results over the past few years. Initially, when we were proposing this project, there was concerns that it would result in increase in crime and violence, but we have the police department here saying that actually it hasn't been an increase in crime and violence, and 90% of neighboring residents and businesses were supportive of OVE in a survey that was done by the University of Oregon in 2015. So I think it's interesting to see when you propose something like this, you see a lot of fears. We're going through this right now in Cottage Grove. We're proposing it's actually a more permanent project, but we're facing the neighborhood sort of fears and concerns. And I think the precedent of Opportunity Village, I think, that quote from the police department and that statistic speaks pretty loudly. And it's also been well received by the folks that are living there. So in that same survey by the University of Oregon, 92% of residents reported that living at OVE gave them a sense of community, and 80% reported that living at OVE made them feel more independent. And so we basically built this Opportunity Village project. It was well received by the neighbors and the city council, and basically we were in a position to do a next project, and rather than do a next Opportunity Village, we saw this other need. So this is looking at the Housing and Community Services Agency of Lane County, their waitlist time. So you'll see for a 3-bedroom, it's about a year. For a 2 or 4 bedroom, it's 2 to 3 years. But for a 1-bedroom, it's a 5-year wait. And so this is for the public housing units that are available through Hacksaw. And then you also have your Section 8 vouchers, but that waiting list only opens once every other year, and it's, I think, 1 in every 4 people that qualify for a Section 8 voucher actually receives it. So inherently, we've built into the system an inequity where people that need housing assistance aren't going to receive it. But what we were seeing in these numbers is that, singles and couples, people that just need a studio or one bedroom, that was the need that was going most unmet, because a lot of the affordable housing that we are developing is focused more on families, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, but there's not a lot of permanent housing for just studio or 1-bedrooms. And so we wanted to build on our success with Opportunity Village, and so we proposed Emerald Village, which is based on a similar concept, but it will be permanent tiny houses. So here you have the site that we purchased. So we actually own this site. It's at North Polk and Railroad Boulevard in the Whitaker neighborhood. And so we worked with the Whitaker Community Council to present this project. And there were a lot of concerns at first, but I think the more we stuck it out and kept coming to the meetings and explained it, the more they understood what we were doing is going to be a positive asset to the Whitaker neighborhood. So this is permanent, affordable housing. The homes will be between 160 and 288 square feet, so two to three or four times the size of the Opportunity Village units. Each house will have a small kitchenette and its own bathroom, and it's being permitted as a multi-family residential development. So this is a residential development following the same land use and building code as every other project. It's just going to be smaller, more cost-effective units. And then the folks that live there will be members of a housing cooperative, so they'll pay $250 to $350 a month, which will cover all of our operating costs so that it'll be self-sustaining and won't have to rely on ongoing donations. And $50 a month will go towards a residence equity fund so that they'll be able to accrue some savings to use if they're to move into an apartment. A big barrier is that people don't have savings to cover the first, last, and deposit. So this would help with things like that. Oops. So here, I think one of the really exciting thing about this project is we started, shortly after we finished our Opportunity Village project, we started talking about Emerald Village. We developed a vision for it. We were going around and presenting these ideas to the community, and we had a huge outpouring of support from the local architecture community. So of the 22 units that will be built there, we've had 14 now, I believe, 14 different local architects and builders that have formed various teams and that have signed on to donate their design services as well as sourcing the material and leading the construction. So there's going to be a lot of very interesting designs. We see this as sort of a demonstration project to try a variety of different construction techniques for building tiny houses and seeing what's most cost effective and what works the best. The parameters that we gave to each team was a material budget of $15,000 and a footprint of 250 square feet. But some of them have gone more. But basically, we have 3 tiers. The smallest units are around 160 square feet, and then we have some around 200 square feet, and then we have a few around 250 to 300 square feet. And so we see some of those larger units working out for couples or even small families, a single parent or a couple with a small child. So we've actually accepted our first several residents for this project. And one is a couple that just had their first baby. But an interesting thing that we found is that over half of the residents that we've selected so far are over the age of 60. And so a lot of the folks that applied were people that are on a fixed income through supplemental security income or Social Security, but they're only making about $700 to $1,000 a month, which isn't enough to get into the cheapest apartment here in Eugene. But for a project that costs, maybe $250 or $300 a month and also allows you to save some of that each month, they're able to afford that. And so we have folks that are senior citizens that are currently living on our streets. A lot of them are living at Opportunity Village. Over half of our residents that we've selected for Emerald Village are currently living at Opportunity Village, but they'll make that transition to permanent housing here with Emerald Village. And so I thought I would just add a few slides here that shows you some of the designs. They're also all available on our website at squareonevillages.org. But these just show you some of the variety of the designs that some of the local architects and designers have come up with. That first one was Arbor South Architecture. This is Rainbow Valley Design and Construction. Michael Fifield, he's a professor at the University of Oregon. Jenna Freebley, this one's actually ADA accessible, so I thought that was a pretty innovative idea to fit ADA accessibility into a tiny house. And then this is a student team of graduate students from the University of Oregon. And so they've been developing these designs over the past year or so, and then we've recently matched them with the residents that we've selected so that they can adapt those designs to the personal desires of the residents. And then we're also building a few houses, the remaining houses, using structural insulated panels, which is a highly efficient and well-insulated material where you basically design your walls, floors, and roof, and then you send it to a factory and they send you basically these pre-manufactured walls, floors, and roofs, and they go together similar to the process that I was talking about with Opportunity Village, just a lot higher quality because they're made in factories and just have really high insulation values. Wrong way. And then more recently, we recently got a grant from the Meyer Memorial Trust to replicate our Emerald Village model in Cottage Grove. And so we've been working with a group of citizens. I see Cindy is here. So we actually have, but basically there was a group in Cottage Grove that was planning to do something. They wanted to build tiny houses to solve the homeless issue. And they emailed us, and we've been basically providing support to them so that they don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel, but can learn from some of our successes and challenges. And we're currently working on developing a similar project down there. So we just acquired about an acre of land and are in the process of fundraising and developing a design for a 13-unit tiny house community there. And in addition, that grant allowed us to work with the Cottage Grove community to help them develop an affordable housing project there. And it also allowed us to document our process. So we got funding to document the process for Opportunity Village and Emerald Village and now Cottage Village, packaging that into a resource. Because we receive multiple emails each week. This is an issue that's not unique to Eugene, Lane County, or even Oregon. We receive emails from throughout the country on a regular basis, and local citizens just wanting to get involved. And I think they see the tiny house as a scale that people can engage in. A lot of times people ask, why don't you build multifamily apartment buildings? And, I think it's because nobody in our organization, SquareOne Villages, actually had previous experience in housing development. Apartment buildings are extremely complex and expensive to build, but these tiny houses can be built for a fraction of the costs, and it's simple enough that you can build them with volunteers and a little bit of skilled labor. And I think it's just a scale that people can wrap their head around. And so basically, we've consolidated into these 10 steps. We now offer this, the Tiny Village Toolbox on our website so that people that are trying to start similar projects can log in and view resources for building similar projects. We just had a group in Medford actually get approved to do an Opportunity Village type project down there. Portland just approved a project, and so it's something that's happening. I think it's starting to happen on a much wider scale because We just don't have adequate funding to build permanent solutions for everyone. And so what are the primary benefits of doing all this? I think, one, it's a cost-effective way to meet people's basic needs. So Opportunity Village is $5 per person per night. And then Emerald Village, once you account for the house, the infrastructure, and the land, comes in at about $50,000 to $60,000 per unit, which is about a third to a quarter the cost of conventional affordable housing. It preserves resident privacy and autonomy, things that are often lost when you're doing a homeless shelter or designing a conventional low-income housing project. And it also connects it with community so that you're around people in a similar situation and people can work together to improve their individual situations. And then lastly, I think a lot of times people think when you combine 1 and 2 that it's going to have that result in crime and violence. But in fact, what we've seen is that when you combine 1 and 2, people take pride and care for where they live, and it's resulted actually in a positive impact on the surrounding community. Then I have our website up there. We have a really great website with lots more information if you guys want to learn more. But I guess I can now open it up to questions.
Okay, we're live. I'm going to give this to Barbara so she can run around the room. Okay. Ruth in the back.
We hear about the homeless, the travelers, and the unhoused. And I know, I talk to guys out there on the Greenway often, and I know they're homeless and they're figuring out where they might camp for tonight and things like that. The travelers seem to be camped out downtown. I haven't been downtown in a couple of weeks. Have they moved? I don't know. But they didn't seem to be interested in going anywhere else, it seemed to me. And then the unhoused, the families that have moved in with other family members and friends temporarily, is kind of the way I see it. How do you have categories?
Do I have categories?
That's my category. Well, I just wonder, do we treat those 3 groups any differently?
Do I treat,
do they have different needs?
I think they do have lots of different needs. I don't necessarily have specific categories that I've lumped people into, but I can say that working with the residents directly at Opportunity Village over the past 3 years, everybody wants to know, like, who is it that lives at Opportunity Village and what type of person lives there? And when we're proposing Cottage Village, they want this very specific, like, who is this person? But what I've found is that, the category of the homeless is probably one of the most diverse categories of people lumped into one category. You basically have people, we've had residents at Opportunity Village that have been homeless the majority of their life and probably face or have little prospect of being financially self-sufficient. And then we also have folks that have fallen out of housing for the first time this month and just need a few weeks to get their feet back under them. For our projects, though, the main sort of qualifier that makes our projects a good fit for people is, can you exist peaceably within a community setting? And so that's sort of the main criteria for our projects, and it's true that that's not for everyone. And so I think a lot of other solutions remain necessary, and I see this as sort of one piece of the puzzle. For folks that can get along in community, I think this is an incredibly effective and huge improvement. Even though the facilities at Opportunity Village are super minimal in terms of physical infrastructure, I think, it's simply offering people privacy, safety, stability, the ability to stay warm and dry, those things that doesn't even like start to think about the design or structure of your house. But those 4 basic things can go a huge way. And I think the issue has gotten so far out of hand is because we've gone so many decades without caring about those basic things. And so the people that you see on the streets, and you may think, well, they don't even care. I'm sure everybody cared at one point, but you leave people without nothing for long enough, and I think it's enough to drive anyone, So that's a quick answer.
I'd like to thank you so much for your fine presentation. It was so complete. I have visited quite a few of those spots from the beginning with Opportunity Village, before that, when we first occupied. And if anyone here missed the tour of the house for teenagers at 33rd and Willamette, you can sign this. I'll have it at this table, and we're going to set up another tour. The question I really want to ask you is, I know at St. Vinny's, we've heard about the cuts in the low-cost housing support by the federal government for credits and so on. Has that affected your program? It's really just halted any large development now of substantial housing that's done by other organizations for low-cost housing with this cut and a proposed cut. Do you know if that's affecting your construction too?
So our projects are sort of a response to that. We've built both of these projects without any public funding, so we see these as ways to fill the gap when our federal government and even our state government are failing to put forth adequate funds to address the issue. These are projects that a local community can come together and develop with the existing resources within your existing community. So obviously an Opportunity Village, that's a lot easier to do. We've stretched it a little bit thinner with Emerald Village. It takes a little bit more money, and so we've been able to get some grants from some local and regional foundations to help fill that gap. Meyer Memorial Trust has been a big funder of us, Oregon Community Foundation. And so with these first 2 projects, we haven't had to rely on public funding. For future projects like Emerald Village, I think we need to find some public funding to do more of those. But with Opportunity Village, I think you could put an Opportunity Village in each neighborhood, and each neighborhood has the resources to make a project like that happen already. And while we'd like to not have to build any more Opportunity Villages, I think the problem that you describe is resulting in even higher demand for Opportunity Villages.
And also the escalating cost of rent in our community, where we've gone up hundreds of dollars.
Yeah,
it's just putting.
It's a national issue. Like I think every community is facing this same issue.
All right, and also RV parks now. St. Vinny's feels that that's maybe the only direction we're going to be having because of the cuts.
The RV park.
Right.
Yeah, and so there are a lot of RV parks throughout Oregon that are in really disrepair, and yeah, I think St. Vinny's is kind of focusing on acquiring some of those properties and trying to fix them up.
Are you tracking very closely the cost of, you say you have over
Wait, nobody can hear you.
And one of the things you said, over half your people that have been chosen for your Emerald Village, I think it is, that they're over 60. And are you tracking what the effect of increase in health costs might affect them in terms of their ability to afford even your place?
Well, most of these folks are on a fixed income, so they get that supplemental security income or Social Security of $700 to $1,000 a month. And yeah, no, I don't know. I guess you're asking if increased health costs would take money out of that regular income so that they couldn't afford rent. I think that's a possibility. So we'd like to be able, so this goes back to the former question. So the way that you solve this is to provide a Section 8 voucher for everyone. And so that way people pay a third of their income towards housing, and the rest is picked up through public subsidy, and that ensures everybody has a house. But currently, only 1 in every 4 people that apply for that type of assistance receive it. And so the only way we can really make a project like Emerald Village work financially without public assistance is for residents to pay $250 to $350 a month. And for the folks that we're selecting, that is a third of your income. And so you hear the term affordable housing a lot, but a lot of people see that as an ambiguous term. What it means is that you're not paying any more than 30% of your income towards rent and utilities. So these folks will be paying about 30% of their income. If you're making $750 a month through SSI, which is a pretty common amount, and you're in one of our most affordable units at $250 a month, that's 30%. So that does leave room for other expenses. But yeah. Hopefully people have health care.
You said you'd like to see these in every part of Eugene. I know where I live, the cost of land is incredible.
Uh-huh.
And I am concerned about how much density you have versus the density. I understand what you said about an apartment building, but you can have a model, as St. Vinny does, that's replicated more than once, and you have, I would guess, a more permanent solution with greater density on land.
Huh.
Am I
Oh, so you're worried it's not enough density?
I'm concerned because I don't think that there is land available everywhere in this community to replicate what you're doing in each neighborhood.
Sure. Yeah, I think I don't think that building an opportunity village is the solution to homelessness in general. But with the transitional model, in the 3 years that we've been there, even though there's only 30 units, we've had 120 people that have lived there over the course. So it's not intended to be a permanent solution, but it's intended to be sort of a hub that people can get off the street and into more permanent housing. And I think it goes back to the question about funding earlier. Yeah, of course, if St. Vinny's could build a nice apartment for everybody, that's the ideal solution. But I think we're well beyond that. And if you look at the amount of funding projected over the next 5 years coming into Lane County and compare that to the demand, it's just, I have a slide, I didn't include it here, but it's just an astronomical gap. And so there's just simply not enough funding. Also, I think, so we're on city-owned land. I think there are a lot of publicly owned sites. And actually, for Eugene, this is a medium density. So if you are looking at a residential site, for both Emerald Village and Opportunity Village, for any site zoned R2 or below, you can't build any more housing than 30 units an acre. So it's actually, it doesn't make a lot of sense for like a New York City or San Francisco, but for a city of Eugene, this is actually considered medium density at 30 units an acre.
Just the one comment about the church across from the South Eugene Post Office. That's being turned into housing for a few homeless kids. For a few homeless kids, and I stress few, to start with. The $150,000 marching grant comes from Tom Bowerman, from his mother's, the remains of her state that are in the Oregon Community Center Foundation.
OCF.
Association Foundation. And the other $50,000 matching, part of that matching, is by John and Wilma Elvard, who over the years have taken in a lot of the homeless kids. Wilma said up to 5 at a time. John would bring them home. And so they've kind of had their own thing going at their house off and on. Those are matching funds. So if you decide you want to contribute to St. Vincent, this is a plea that everything you contribute to St. Vincent in the name of this housing goes towards matching funds at this time. Thank you.
I think that's about it.
All right, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. So, I think Andy brought a couple copies of his book with him, so.
I've got a book and I've also got some flyers on.
Some flyers on the villages, more information over there. So you might have noticed in the announcements at the beginning on the scrolling announcements that because we're becoming so expert at housing and housing choices, that our American Institute of Architects Southwest Oregon chapter is bringing in a speaker on the missing middle of housing, which is duplexes, townhouses, row houses, and that speaker is going to be doing a public lecture, and the league is co-sponsoring that lecture on the evening of April 11th, and how you will need to reserve a seat, and the details will be in the newsletter. So if you want, just look for it in your August next week when it's hot off the press. It'll have all that information in it. And then our speaker next month is Congressman DeFazio, and we'll see you then. Thank you.